Hi, this is Paul. Yesterday I posted this particularly messy video. For some reason, some of you really like the messy videos. And when I'm finished doing it, I'm always feeling so conflicted. Did I say anything? Was it worth posting? Post it. And it's gotten a lot of response, almost 300 comments in the last 10, 12 hours that it's been on the internet, which is quite a bit. I don't necessarily look at the numbers of views so much because that's really deceptive. I look really at the comments to see, whether anything got communicated, whether people are engaging with it. You don't have to agree with it. You can disagree with it, but it's nice that when you leave something that's credible to say or something that's worthwhile saying. So, but right after I posted the video, I thought, well, I should probably be good to my friend Glenn after I just disagreed with him on video when I got to church and was exercising my dog a bit, and the algorithm popped up this thing: why I unfollowed redeemed Zoomer. Christian YouTube. So I decided to unsubscribe from him. I don't watch his videos anyway. He's a conservative reformed guy, but then I noticed that Redeemed Zoomer left just the nicest response to this video, and I thought, oh, so I did not make a video that said why I unfollow Speak Life. Ah! What gets me about this is, God bless him, he's just so earnest, but come on. Redeemed Zoomer, he's 21 years old. He's totally upfront about, his YouTube channel and how he got it, and he's making a little bit of extra money until his next thing, and so he attacked the PCA. Oh, come on. Anyway, then you need to watch. I might use this for branding. You need to watch Dog Bark's latest Getaway. Has a nice little Freddy dance scene in there. I thought it was lovely. Somebody didn't like my branding last week Friday. It's like, I could take a little bit of this, but there's way too much of that silliness. Too much silliness. I had to turn off. The internet makes me laugh. Anyway, so yeah, Glenn, I know Glenn well enough to know, yeah. So Glenn shot, I'll get into the thread in a minute. Glenn shot right back at me with a nice still of me, and then Neil Daedalus comes back with a really gnarly still of me. People. This stuff is supposed to be fun, okay? Have a little fun with each other. It's, yeah, you can do serious work on YouTube and the internet, but why unfollowed redeemed Zoomer? All he wants to do is make pretty buildings with Minecraft. Dude. All right, I'll resubscribe. I got over 1,000 subscriptions anyway. The algo sends me whatever it thinks I'll want to watch. So, but probably so. Oh, PVK had Redeemed Zoomer. Would I unfollow Redeemed Zoomer? All right, ADHD PVK. Get back to the purpose of this video, lest I get more comments that, yeah, I like silliness generally, but this channel's way too silly. I feel like VeggieTales. Oh. You see, the problem with this little corner is when I talk about this stuff, they listen and they have skills. And they'll turn me into Bob the Tomato. They'll turn me into Larry the Cucumber. They'll turn me into Junior Asparagus. They'll turn me into a lobster. I have Chad walking around in his lobster costume. That's the one thing I love about the little corner. We do talk seriously and we do talk about important stuff, but we also have fun. Because you know what? Fun is important. Laughter is a gift from God, and if we can't laugh, and especially if we can't laugh at ourselves, I feel bad for the people that can't laugh at themselves. Anyway, tomorrow's video is a mess, I wrote. I usually sort out my own head with messy videos. That's what I do. So you get to see the process of PVK's Consciousness Congress. I've been watching a bunch of IFS things lately. My parts are doing things. I have very few firefighters, couple of managers, but I had more videos about IFS at some point. I'm talking to John Vervaeke next week. I'm really interested to talk to him about IFS. And, of course, the whole Hermes situation we'll get into. So tomorrow's video, that's the video I posted this morning, is a mess. I usually sort out my own head with messy videos. I'm Team Tom Holland with respect to Glenn Scrivener's heresy video. Now Glenn came back and said, hey, come on. I believe in following Jesus too. And I know you do, Glenn. I know you do. Now I can probably explain after the messy video. So, yeah, sorry. Glenn Scrivener argues that Christianity is not a thing that contains its own solvent, and I guess that's really the nub of it, and that really caught my attention, of course, because of the big orthodox contention that Protestantism is just plain solvent and it boils down to atheism, and I think there's truth in that. I think there's a lot of truth in that. The protest movement is a protest, and I go back to this great tweet from Jonathan Peugeot. If you want to build a civilization, you cannot do so on words like dark, rebel, or heterodox. By using these identifiers, you can criticize existing systems effectively, but you will never build anything of value and coherence. And that's why I often talk about at some point the protest must end. And I had a lovely conversation with Aaron Vriesman this morning, who's a pastor in North Blendon, Michigan, which is Hudsonville area. And, you know, he was talking about engaging with Christians on Facebook and how, you know, he often winds up, you know, sort of siding with the Roman Catholics. And of course you do, because many self-conscious, more magisterial Protestants recognize that we're protesting the Catholic Church, but in many ways still wanting to be part of it, and that then connects us with Orthodox who's coming in and telling, sharing what they have, pulling the stuff out of their old storeroom, showing it to the Catholics, showing it to the Protestants, and we want to have those conversations. We want to wrestle with the whole of the Christian tradition. And so, I mean, Peugeot is right in that little tweet. That's a great little tweet. I saved it and I keep it and I haul it out when it's needed. So, you know, Glenn and I could have a healthy conversation about this, but this is a tiny little question about language and posture that Glenn and I are working through. But that's what people do with theology. You work through the tiny little postures. Is there something that? See, I got to watch the camera, and I got to keep. Some people complained that I took down the Muppets that were there because the camera keeps wanting to focus in on the Muppet face instead of this face. So anyway, this video is way too silly. The whole channel is silly. The whole channel is very silly. By the way, well, that gets to the crew thing when anyway, back to the tweet. Glenn Scrivener's argument is that what has emerged since the 1960s is simply a heresy, and all the twisting and squirming that Tom Holland is doing is unnecessary. I want to push back on that and call it a fork, for some of which, and we can save some of which will become heresy later. And I think that's right, because I think this is sort of how Christianity continues to work through the tensions that it has. I should pull up Sam's, well, when we get down to get further, I'll pull up Sam's comment on my video. So, well, I think Tom Holland is right that he doesn't put it in these terms, but what's happening now is Christianity is working through this question of love and what is love. I got to take care of that lion's head back there. So it's at this level of detail and nuance that I'm sort of processing Glenn's complaint. And I if you listen to the whole thing with Tom Holland makes a strong point. Towards the end, Louise Perry starts really pushing back on Tom Holland with respect to this thesis, and we're going to have to talk more about this thesis as we get going. But Tom Holland just keeps coming back to the fact that this way of Jesus continues to impact both sides. That Jesus has so thoroughly colonized, and that this way is so thoroughly colonized that it's impacting both sides. I made a transcript. Maybe I should read it. Tom Holland says this: I think it's true because I'm amazed again and again and again when people who describe themselves as vehemently anti-Christian or post-Christian or atheist or whatever, just how deeply rooted in Christian assumptions they are, and how deeply rooted in Christian assumptions the fabric of this country and the West more generally remain. And I just don't see that fading anytime soon. Then he has a nice little bit about Augustine and Pelagius. But I suppose the corollary, I say it in the American, I think he says corollary, the corollary of that is actually, you were talking about Christian heresy. I think there are ways in which, so I would say that there's one big theological pivot, overtly theological pivot, that does happen in the 60s. And I think that has had a very retrograde effect, which I dislike strongly. And it surprises me because I'm thinking that I've always approved of it. And that's the reaction against the notion of original sin, which has theologically always been the marker of specifically Latin Christianity. See, now he's getting more specific. It's Augustine, the great Latin doctor of the church. He theologically wins over Britain's first public intellectual, Pelagius, who argues that Christians can attain perfection through their own agency, that you can do good works and win heaven that way. And this is where I've often said, well, Jordan Peterson sort of has an Augustinian anthropology and a Pelagian soteriology. Jesus isn't going to drag that big heavy cross up the hill for you, bucko. Get to work. I still have to get back to Jordan Peterson and Alex O'Connor's and the vicarious aspect, because I don't want to cheap shot Jordan on that, because he's very much struggling. Again, I say with Jordan, there's sort of the frame that he is certain of, which is down here below, and then there's these other questions which he's still wrestling with, and he's very open about doing that wrestling with them. Pelagius's perspective always seems to be a much more attractive one, but actually the implications of this is that if you can attain perfection, then those who have not attained perfection are to be condemned. Whereas if all people are sinners, then the most saintly, then you have to be aware that at the very least the mote in your own eye, at least of the mote in your own eye, and it may be a beam, who knows? Before you can condemn other people. This is a point that if you listen to Tim Keller, he made again and again and again and again. And he kept saying Christianity, especially, of course, Reformed Christianity, we, on one hand, recognize that even our best achievements, we can only take limited credit for, because it comes from the grace of God. And so this is how you can actually improve without self-righteousness and looking down at others. But if Pelagius is sort of your theologian and it's all up to you, well, hey, I've achieved this. What's wrong with you down there at the bottom of the hill just looking at that cross saying, boy, that looks heavy and spiky. I don't want to go up that hill with that. Yeah, see? You deserve to live down there in Gehenna. So I love that very interesting portion that Tom then gets into. And it provides a sense of humility. I think it enforces a measure of humility, a self-awareness, a sense that perfection always is impossible. I think it keeps us all honest, and I think it's resulted from one of the most unattractive aspects of our culture since the 1960s, which is a kind of turbocharged priggishness, a turbocharged sense that perfection is possible, and a kind of readiness to sit in judgment in many ways, this is antithetical to the spirit of the 60s. So he sees even in this spirit of the 60s attention, no judgment, no judgment. One of my favorite examples of this, of course, it's not on YouTube. My Name is Earl, White Lie Christmas, where, what was her name? Oh shoot, come on, give me a name in one of these clips here. What was his ex-wife's name? Oh, it'll appear in the comment section if you really need to know. Anyway, her mother had a gambling problem, and she just kept bankrupting the family and keeps saying, "Don't judge me, don't judge me." And it's by the way that back to Tom Holland. It's by the way that revolutions rock. People are consumed by their own revolution. And this is part of what, of course, the Orthodox are pointing to, and this is part of what Glenn Scrivener is trying to avoid, that Christianity just sort of continues to consume itself. You see, people 20 years ago were models of reformist virtue, now being condemned as fascists. I suppose J.K. Rowling would be the great example of that. That kind of avatar. Now, reading a transcripts are always really messy because we speak very messily, actually. But back and forth they go over that, and Tom basically continues to make. Then Louise Perry sort of listening to the Collinses, because she's had conversations with the Collinses, says basically, yeah, but we'll use the Collinses term. The urban monoculture is sterile. They're not going to be around more than a generation. That it might be that 60s Reformation was as sterile as the Shakers, or maybe a little less sterile than the Shakers, but basically will by themselves birth out, and the religiously conservative that actually reproduce will inherit the earth. And they go back and forth. They go back and forth over that. And I'm super excited about this book. And who knows how long it's going to take Tom to get it out. It's amazing. He gets everything done that he does now with The Rest is History and all those great episodes. But I see this much more in terms of, over time, these things emerge and they have to be worked through. And that's what I see in, let's say, who is Jesus Christ? How is Jesus God? What does it mean? What does the word God mean? How are we going to suss this out? So then you have these creeds that emerge as the church has these councils, and we still have a few Unitarians sitting around, and there's at least one that I think I'm very, very fond of and respect him greatly. He's a really smart guy, and he's a pillar of this very strange little church adjacent corner that we have going here. So I'm a little. It's also important to recognize that Glenn Scrivener and his channel is an Anglican ministry. That changes some things. There's my church channel, and there's this channel. And as I said to Aaron Vriesman this morning, this channel is for thinking out loud. Not everything that you say needs to be settled. Now, there's danger to that, and you got to sort of keep cautious with that, but we're trying out ideas. That's what we're doing. We're talking with one another and trying to figure things out. Glenn Scrivener sort of says, well, heresy, that comes from the Greek, which basically means choice. And Glenn Scrivener uses heresy as choice away from the original thing we call Christianity. But at this moment, that thing is sort of like Harry Potter's snitch. And so I'm not gonna play this whole video. It's only 13 minutes of the clip from Friday's live stream. This is the one with Jordan Peterson and Alex O'Connor and the snitch on it. But Yosef comes in and raises a vital point.
And I've never seen Alex O'Connor before. Like, I had no idea what to expect. And the way he was able to get Peterson to answer questions, I thought was excellent. But where they ended up, like, at least so I don't have the DW Plus, but like where they ended up in the free version, I think Alex had this like last question, or it was also maybe it was like in the last 5 minutes. It was like really at the end, which was like, what makes this Christian exactly, right? Or what defines a Christian? Because the way that Peterson was defining this, and like he was saying, well, this pattern exists in Taoism, and this pattern exists, and like obviously it's going to use different language, but like all the examples he was giving of like, hey, this makes you a Christian if you hold this view and this view, like those are all things that like I hold, but I would, so like if he's going to define Christian so broadly that it doesn't have meaning that gives it an identity, like what's exactly the point? I mean, and there are people who do that here in our little corner too. There are people who say like, oh well, like you're obvious, like they would consider me a Christian, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And not only that, but it's, I mean, given the history, there's also kind of like a bit of pain associated with like being told that I'm a Christian. But I just, yeah, I don't know. I wanted that to get explored further, and I don't think they went there in the, even though it was in the last 5 minutes, I don't think they went.
So the link to that video will be below, and it's got the Jordan Peterson, Alex O'Connor, and then La Familia will come in, and he'll make the point, and I'll make the point that yeah, this is a really critical point, and in many ways, I think if I didn't think Tom Holland's thesis was so strong, I wouldn't show the cover of his book in every sermon of mine. But there's limits to it, and many of you have put that in the comments section. And when there's limits to something like this, it's worth sort of exploring. And of course, this has come up with civilizational Christianity and all of those things. And I've got a clip from that same conversation with John Vervaeke, Christopher Mastropietro, and Andrew Sweeney, where John sort of dismisses, you know, cultural Christianity in a certain way, but he also is one who wants to steal the culture the way Christianity did. And so you basically have to continue to drill down and continue to do careful work, because the term Christian is not a useless term, but obviously what we're bumping into is that maybe we have to add other words to it, or maybe we should use other words. And but that's just so fraught, because language is, of course, a commons that we all share. Dawkins and I and Hersey Ali just went round after round about this on the dissenting discourse, or whatever it is. And again, I saw that title and I thought, yeah, Peugeot is right. Peugeot is right with that darn little tweet. Now, Tom Holland is right in noting Nazis and the American Civil Rights Movement as key elements of the 20th century development of this fork. It is important that it happened in America because, unlike Europe, our Christianity wasn't founded by an institution. And now we're getting down into this question of civilizational Christianity, dread Christian nationalism, all of these sorts of things, because how can Christianity provide a foundation for a state if there's not an institution that's holding it there? That's, in many ways, what's beneath the tension beneath Glenn Scrivener's video. In England, you have the Church of England, and you have King Charles III as defender of the church and allower of Ramadan to tick off Richard Dawkins. So, okay. And this, of course, is all over Europe, that you have these state churches that are, I guess nominal is exactly the right word. They're there in name, but they don't really have any function. There's just an article out about orthodoxy in Canada and America in Epoch Times, which Epoch Age, it's a news organization run by Falun Gong, but the guy has been following me for a long time, and they said they don't get involved in making the news. Okay, but I just thought, wow, what a weird world. Anyway, I can maybe put that article below too, or maybe I won't. You'll be able to find it. But it's interesting because he's a Canadian living in Romania, and he talked about the fact that in Romania, you know, the important people in the town are like the mayor and the priest is like, you know, he's the mayor, the police, and the priest. The priest is like a cop, and you know, in pre-World War II Christian Reformed little Dutch enclaves, the dominie was a man to be feared. The dominie had authority. The dominie, there's a joke that when there's a pause in a conversation, there's a little Dutch saying, the Dutch have sayings for everything, that the dominie just walked by, because the dominie is so high and lifted up and such a fearsome authority. Dominie, of course, means Lord. The dominie is so high and lifted up that you dare not cross the dominie. And I've told the story before of how my my paternal grandmother's family came to America, basically because the mother, my great grandfather's father died, and his mother wanted him to stay on the farm and work it, but he had already pledged to move to Granville Avenue, Grand Rapids, Michigan, with his fiance, and she thought she could use this as leverage. So they asked the dominie, and the dominie said, he basically quoted the book of Genesis, "You'll leave your father and mother and cleave to your wife. You go to America." And the only picture we have of the woman whose son left her is a picture of a very sad woman. So, I mean, the dominie was a fearsome thing, but how many people are going to church in Romania? Churches are fairly empty. So you've got that cultural power and that gravitas, but, and so we talked about, maybe I will put it in, we talked about the, it's how orthodoxy is coming to America and why, and some of those kinds of things. So how can you have a state religion without a visible church structure? Well, they're Protestants, so they have an invisible church structure, and that's exactly what America had, and the American empire is built on that. America's state church in good Protestant fashion was an invisible church. It reached the peak of its imperial power in the UN Declaration of Human Rights. We're going to come back to that a little bit later. This invisible Christian imperialism is also called secularism. Ayaan Hirsi Ali keeps talking about the lack of confidence in the West for its culture. The civil rights movement broke the confidence of the invisible church in the West. The church was exposed by the black church as hypocritical. And I linked to an article that I've read a number of times, or referenced a number of times in my video, how the civil rights movement converted white liberal Protestants to secularism. And I'll put the link to that below as well. It's on Pathos, which, they just bombard you with ads. Gosh, I hate it. Substack is such an improvement. If they got racism wrong, what else did they get wrong? Women, gays, trans? The mainline church starts chasing the snitch, which results in wokeism. It's invisible, it's universal, it can't be sectarian. If you're good enough, you don't need Jesus. And then a great Flannery O'Connor quote. There was always a deep, black, wordless conviction in him that the way to avoid Jesus was to avoid sin. Boy, you can paste that on the woke movement. So Tom Holland is right that there is a fork, and we don't have a name for it yet. I call it progressive liberationism. But in time, a name will emerge if it lasts long enough. It's not looking healthy, as Louise Perry says. Christianity is a history of forks. Sometimes there are resolutions, sometimes dead ends. My favorite definition of a heresy is a dead end. See Alistair McGrath's Heresy. Meanwhile, we quarrel, hopefully without too much violence. So here's the quote that I use from his book. So what is heresy? Heresy is the best seen as a form of Christian belief that more by accident than design ultimately ends up subverting, destabilizing, and even destroying the core of Christian faith. Both this process of destabilization and identification of its threat may be spread out over an extended period of time. A way of making sense of one aspect of Christian faith, such as identity of Jesus Christ, an aspect that may initially be welcome and find general acceptance, may later be discontinued on account of potential damage it subsequently realizes to be capable of causing. Now, to give Sam his due, McGrath failed to give any coherent definition of heresy that wasn't a form of just so story. Such that, however highbrow neo-Orthodox Anglicanism arrived at its peculiar place in history and dogma, is the definition of orthodoxy, and everything else is heresy. No principle was uniformly applied or recommended. PVK transcends these problems and found a thesis where McGrath had failed to provide one. So there you go, Alistair. I made your book better. I'll be expecting maybe a note of gratitude in the mail. Yeah, Glenn, maybe get on that. Or Justin Brierly knows everyone. Justin Brierly knows everyone. All right, back to the tweets. One comic tactic in these fights is originalism. It usually resolves nothing. Unitarians, like my friend Sam, argue that Christians were Unitarians before they were Trinitarians, and Sam has more comments about that too. Catholics and Orthodox say that the church comes first and makes the Bible. Protestants say it doesn't matter because it's inspired by the Holy Spirit and it makes the church, so what comes first? Christianity is going to be a deeply problematic adjective while we wrestle with pervasive pluralism. However problematic it may sound, it's personal and it's the personal and relational that's your way out. Definitions will always be problematic. We have the problem of categories, basically. And so what must you do? Follow Jesus. You follow that lamb wherever he goes. The title of tomorrow's video, unless I change it, is, well, tomorrow's was this morning's video. Christianity is not a thing or an adjective. It is a relationship with the living person of Christ. I'm watching John Vervaeke work through his Silk Road journey, and I've been advocating for the personal as a dominant procedural approach for a long time, and maybe we'll discuss that next week when we have our conversation too, because when I look at his Silk Road video, they're really moving towards the relational. And I think that's exactly right. And I think that's where you have to go when you escape the tyranny of the propositional. Because although the propositional has its merit, we all have to be fundamentally relational at the end of the day. And I think the relational has the broadest frame in which to engage. It's practically the only frame through which we can engage. All the other frames, they have their benefits, but we're stuck with a relational. We'll never get beyond it. In a recent video, Christopher Mastropietro and Andrew Sweeney, I see John moving more and more into the relational and the imaginal that I mentioned in the video. I think it's the way that the West will go as we continue to move out of the dominant modernist paradigm and into a more narrative and enchanted realm. As I'm watching these internal family systems videos by the founder, is it Charles Schwartz? Really interesting. Found a really interesting video that I was watching about it. Good description from Schwartz and the host. And then right in the video, they have this little mini session because she has something she wants to work through. And now she's got the founder of Internal Family Systems right there. And so, because I've sort of wondered, okay, what does this look like? And you can kind of see what it looks like. But it is completely, it is completely narrative. It is so narrative driven. And I think this continues to prove Peterson right. The Sins of Adam and the True Nature of Eve video on those who wrestle with God that he put is just, I mean, I think that's, I don't know if I've seen Peterson sort of do what he did in his Maps of Meaning class as well, since Maps of Meaning class is there. He's healthy. I think for him, sort of like me, my messy videos help me work out some things. For him, writing a book, especially when he talks about his process of writing books, which is edit. Look at Maps of Meaning. That's just really helped him sort of clarify and hone and solidify. And so when you look at that video, it's very good. Now,
the next one is,
the more real something is larger. And this is John Vervaeke's conversation with, why do I forget his name? Evan Thompson on the blind spot and perception. That was an outstanding conversation. There was so much in there. And what you see happening is that between Vervaeke and Peugeot and Peterson, that old paradigm of sort of reductive materialism and propositional tyranny, they're just destroying it. They are really just destroying it, and they're destroying it, at least Vervaeke and Peterson are destroying it using science. So then I made a little clip, and I'll play that one just here because it's right here.
Maybe more controversial, but it sort of follows from the first. There's an implicit judgment of realness, and I think, well, I hope you agree. I take real as a comparative adjective, right? When people from Plato to Merleau-Ponty to Whitehead have said you only judge one thing as an illusion by judging something else as real. It's always comparative, and vice versa. And so what I was hearing something like fundamental, implying something like more real, and the idea is I'm not happy with these terms, and we'll play with them a little bit later. But the concrete is more real than the abstract because of something like, and you say this multiple times too, there's a richness, there's an inexhaustibleness to that, and this is the point about the map territory kind of, the territory is way richer.
Now, this point that he makes here is really key in my solvent point. Because if Christ is continuing to work in the world and work at the church, now I'm not a post-millennial, so, and we have right, listening to Mary Harrington and being a little skeptical about progress. But if Christ is at work in his church and he continues to purify his bride, and he continues to have to, in many ways, keep up with the continued evolution of science and technology, including a solvent in the code is really helpful, so that when the church sort of achieves something, and I would argue, and this will sort of rub some orthodoxy the wrong way, that the Enlightenment was an achievement in Christianity and the church. Now, again, I might have to walk back some of these things in a few minutes when we talk about the thingness of Christianity and the dilemma of categories, but the fact that it arose in the West, I do believe that modernity and the Enlightenments are achievements of the church, and those are steps forward, and I think there are things we can be thankful for. But as always, these things also come with downsides, and what's happening now, I call it a recession of modernity. Peterson calls it a counter-enlightenment, is again a recalibration of modernity. And what I see Evans and Vervaeke doing here is continuing in that recalibration. But that recalibration is also going to be theological. And in many ways, a lot of the stuff we're dealing with in terms of science and culture and society right now, you can find anticipations of it in some 20th century theologies.
As an inexhaustible, it overflows any particular map, even a globe, even a Earth-sized globe, et cetera, et cetera.
And I would make an argument that if creation 1.0, this creation is like that, then how much more won't creation 2.0 in the resurrection be? Can something be more inexhaustible? Can something be more beautiful in its inexhaustibility? A creation not subject to decay, but one which is in obedience to spirit? I would argue yes, but that's me being a Christian minister.
Is that?
Yeah,
and
sure.
That's very so for me, just because we're sort of putting cards on the table, that's the influence of Polanyi on me. He was proposing that as the mark of what he calls contact with reality. And Esther Lightcap Mead has talked about that in her book of the same title. This inexhaustibleness, but it's not cacophonous inexhaustible, and we'll play with that a little bit. It's kind of like an inexhaustible fount of intelligibility, right?
Right.
And so is that landing?
Yeah.
There?
So that's very much it. I mean, another way that I think of it is that our being always is more than or overflows our knowing, because knowing, happens through certain means, through certain methods, through certain sensory systems, through certain forms of intelligibility, and our being is always larger than that. It always overflows that. Yeah.
So that.
Okay, that's the end of the little clip that I made of that. I think Tom Holland is right that there's solvent built in all the way back to the Hebrew prophets. And if you remember Dominion, it starts there. That right away, what I think we see in the disenchantment is seeded by the Hebrews. and so you get this solvent just continues to afford the recalibration. So we're in a phase right now, sort of a reinfanting phase, and there's a disenchanting phase, and I think we actually continue to recalibrate by this opponent processing, going back and forth and back and forth, and for that reason I think this is a feature, not a bug. And Protestantism, when it needed solvent or desired solvent to address accretions, found its solvent within the Hebrew scriptures, within the Bible, and but you use solvent too much and you burn too much away and you have to bring some back, and so back and forth you go, back and forth you go. All the way back to the Hebrew prophets, as he notes in Dominion. That keeps working to purify the Christian faith. We keep making heresies and discarding them over great periods of time. And I think actually in the providence of God, and this, Sam, you can take this point. Some heresies he designs to keep around a little while. Maybe they have a point to make that Trinitarians will have to say, and as we continue to ponder the Trinity and its mysteries, your Unitarian solvents can sort of eat on us. And as Father Eric, who's a brilliant Roman Catholic priest, love Father Eric a ton, respect him a great deal. As Father Eric has said, and as I've said before, Sam continues to make us better Trinitarians, more honest Trinitarians, and for that. So that Sam would not be built up in the pride of his brilliance, the Lord gave him Hank. So you can watch that on Transfigured, Hank and Sam as they go through the... and of course, because I mentioned Hank in this way, he's going to call me tomorrow. Tomorrow's a busy day, Hank. I don't know if I'm going to answer, but you can certainly call if you like. We all must pick our paths today. We don't want to choose dead ends. So I'm very close to Glenn Scrivener in terms of our path. I mean, Calvinist Anglicans are pretty darn close. Yet, what is happening now is part of the long process of the bride the process of the bride becoming ready for the bridegroom. Let's see if I can pick up some of the...
the next one is, and this one may be
Twitter.
Maybe.
Let's see if... No. My own no-no-nos. Twitter. So yeah, so then this was the still that Neil got, me being having a mean face to poor Alexandra Union and her Orthodox retreat center just not far from Yosemite National Park. What a mean, silly man Paul Vanderklay is, mean and silly. So back in the day 2 years ago, Justin had me on Unbelievable with James Croft, and it was a good conversation. James is a delightful guy, and we talked about the fact that he's he wants to start this network of godless congregations, and it should be the best time with the rise of the nuns. The nuns should be flooding in there, but they're not. And so he's got some issues with Tom Holland's thesis, and he grabbed onto my Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'm writing about this right now, Paul. Why do you say that the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights is peak of an invisible Christian imperialism? Doesn't seem to me there's much distinctively Christian in there. And James can make a strong argument, because part of how they produced that is they got people from around the world together to talk about it and to find what they could agree on in terms of human rights. But again, I'm still Team Tom Holland with respect to human rights. And you can go to Vanderclips, where I clipped an older thing of Unbelievable and renamed it for the sake of the internet. Tom Holland destroys the self-evident nature of belief in human rights. And I'll put the link to the original, or maybe just I'll put the link to the Vanderclips. You can find the original and the notes to the Vanderclips, and you can just do Inception that way. So I'm still on Team Tom Holland, but James has a point. Just like Glenn has a point. Lots of people have points, and that's sort of the way we do conversations. Like, yeah, that's a good point, but I still think yada, yada, yada. And I said, well, the key is to keep Jesus hidden. Then you smuggle in his ideas and just call it real or self-evident or secular. And James says, I know that's something Tom Holland has said, but is there any evidence it's true? These atheists always looking for evidence. I feel a bit, I've read a bit about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted, and there's no indication to me that the intention was to repack fundamental Christian moral insights into secular packaging. And I think if I were to be Tom Holland's advocate, I would say that those ideas from Jesus and the New Testament were already internalized. And they're not only already internalized into someone like Eleanor Roosevelt and broadly into what people see just as Americanism or the American spirit, but they in fact were already internalized into members of other religions. Because these religions have been bumping up against each other and fighting each other and competing for each other. And if there's any place in the world that religions compete in a religious marketplace, it's America. Because America, you can go back and read de Tocqueville, America is deeply Protestant, but it's always been a religious marketplace. And that's one thing that Tocqueville really noted, where he said, well, those preachers in England, they can sit around and just receive their fat checks and live in their government subsidized housing, and in Germany the government is collecting the tithes for you, etc., etc., etc. In America, the preachers got to go out and do their own work or they starve. And so America has proven to be a vibrant religious marketplace. And, well, we've had the rise of the nuns, but now they say that the rise of the nuns has peaked, a bunch of other sort of things, and we're probably, again, going to see a resurgence of religion. Because, again, I think Tom Holland's got me convinced among a whole bunch of these aspects of his thesis. And that, of course, gets into my talk about the recession of modernity. As far as I can tell, it's an assertion without any evidence offered to support it. Well, I'll let Tom Holland provide his own evidence. I think he'd just say, read the book Dominion. Now, what people tend to want is something like a clean room. And I think this is the way in which science has impacted our imagination, that we think that Brett Weinstein had a good conversation about, basically, if you're a biologist, you need to know the lab, but you also need to know the jungle. Because, what you do in a lab is always try to get rid of variables so you can have evidence. It doesn't work that way in the real world. And I think Tom Holland's evidence is the fact that Christianity upended thousands of years of moral assumption and rewrote the moral imagination of the world. And again, I'll leave it to Tom Holland to impress his own thesis. So I said, well, which are you questioning? Universal Declaration as the peak, or it's an expression of Christianity? Both. Reading a lot of philosophical work which went into drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as accounts of the process itself, and all portray it as a genuinely international effort, including many Christians, including thinkers from countries which were never Christian. Yes, but think about samples. I've just been reading, so I continue. I'm going to finish up the book of Acts over the next few weeks in my Sunday sermons, and so Felix is out and Festus is in. But, when you read about this, and you can read this in Tom Holland's newest book, Pax, boy, I should say, Tom, what I've done for Tom Holland's career, maybe what Tom Holland's done for my career, one hand washes the other. He's had a much more successful career than I have in many ways. But, this is little exclusive club there between Judea and Rome, and, Agrippa I gets named as king, and all of this family drama. The Cardassians had nothing on the elite of the Roman Empire. But having lived in the developing world, in many ways it's the same today. Who rules the developing countries today? It's people who've been educated in Western Europe and North America and gone back because their families have sort of pulled the economic and material cream out of the developing world and grown rich. You have enormous income inequality in many of these countries. And so the kinds of people that they would bring in to write this United Declaration of Human Rights, it has already been people whose minds have been seeded by the universality. Holland makes that point often. And they've already been colonized by these ideas because secularism and imperialism has made them exactly the kind of people that Eleanor Roosevelt and company would invite to the United Nations. Who got invited to the ARC thing in London? People who were in the Jordan Peterson sphere and in some other connecting spheres. When you put together a project like this, you invite the people that are going to say what you want them to say. You don't go, deep into Saudi Arabia and pick up someone who perhaps is marginally literate but has always been to one particular mosque and plop them in the middle of that committee. You pick the elites of the world. And who selects the elites of the world? It's the people who've done well in school. Whose schools? What curriculum? I mean, the woke can make this argument with respect to internalized just about everything. Well, there's a degree of truth to it, and the truth is, who are you going to get to write this thing but the people you know who will write the right thing? And why does it look so much different from, let's say, where Modi is going, or the Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood that Ayaan Hirsi Ali has kicked so hard against her whole life? It's because you bring around the table the people you want there. So then I wrote this. I think the major religions have been deeply impacting each other for a very long time. This has created a situation where at times tensions within a particular religion can create wildly different expressions, like Islam is a religion of peace, and here, Allah Akbar, as we fly these planes into the trade. Are both Islam? Now you have the problem of category. And one side says, that's not true Islam. I mean, I live in this as a Protestant when, minor particularities are major particularities. And this goes all the way back to the end of the book of Acts, because Felix and Porcius Festus are like, we got this guy Paul, he's still in prison, and Agrippa II, I'm pretty sure it's Agrippa II, comes in, and he's like, Paul, we could have let you go. And Paul's kind of like, yeah, but that's not my track. But they're like, this is a minor theological dispute between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Is there a resurrection of dead? Yes, Joseph, I ordered Levinson's book, and I'm waiting for a used copy to come. I'm very interested in the history of the idea of the resurrection of the dead in first century. I'm interested in that stuff. Why wouldn't I be? It's what I work in every week when I make that sermon. So you see this with Christianity. You have the main line over here, and you have Westboro Baptist here. Now, this is where, of course, the true Christian, Jordan Peterson a while ago, I think, pulled up something from Jung that basically said, Jesus was the only true Christian. Okay, but that isn't really very helpful, too. We go back to the point that Yosef and La Familia Bazzani, I'm going to his native land next month, really looking forward to that. The point that they were making, we're sorting this out. And in fact, in many ways, the entire history of the Christian church has been trying to sort out what's it really like to be a follower of Jesus. As I become a better and better follower, what categories can I see? Now, again, I'll offer my definition of a Christian as to anyone who will listen. It's very short. Are you ready for it? Some of you have heard it quite a bit. Here it comes. Get a pencil, write it down. A Christian is someone who trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves. Now, Yosef pushed back and said, a Jew can say that, but a Jew trusts God more than he trusts himself. And it's like, yeah, Jesus didn't start from a blank slate in Galilee and Judea in the first century, and to the degree that even such ardent people who have complaints about my theology, like my good friend and no greater disciple Jacob, says, yeah, that Jesus, he's all right. The stuff about him being God and about him being the last definitive Messiah, don't know about that, or he'll say things quite a bit more strongly than that. But here we are. And this, of course, is what we're wrestling with. And that was what the previous video was about, too. And James Croft agreed. The truth is, any complex cultural phenomenon like religion can be interpreted in many different ways and used to motivate wildly different behaviors and support wildly different values. And that is the case. And so we're sort of in this mess. And so I want to bring in another piece from the John Vervaeke, Christopher Mastro Pietro, Andrew Sweeney conversation. I'm just going to play that clip and comment on it, and then I got to land the plane here. Where did I put that?
Frequently does. Chris articulated the exact point. And the exact point was the shift from a very almost...
Now, John here is talking about the shift from a religion that's not a religion to the Silk Road. And the Silk Road is, well, he's going to talk about it more.
Curious, top-down orientation with the religion that's not a religion, an engineering attitude or stance, to one that is properly from the standpoint of, humility. The attitude, the stance is one of inventio towards the advent of the sacred. I like that, actually. It's a nice turn of phrase, inventio towards the advent. And I think that's exactly to the point. And I just want to reinforce that shift that he is pointing to in the orientation, the standpoint and the stance. I think that is fundamental. He fundamentally articulated what is central and crucial about the shift from the religion that's not a religion to the philosophical Silk Road. As he said, obviously it takes discipline. Discipline means to follow. And if you're going to walk a road, you better follow a path, right? You just can't wander aimlessly. But that discipline is always within inventio, that is in service of the Advent. So first of all, I want to thank Chris for that. I think that was astonishingly articulate and to the point, and I'm grateful for that.
No, I love that too. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Andrew.
No, I'm just saying I love very much that as a image which is contrary to the sort of reactionary movement of religion. Yes. That you feel that people are going back to that because they want the safety of.
Okay, let's talk about some of these things. Now, I know for some of you, when I play videos from this side of the corner, John Vervaeke's side of the corner, there is some reactivity to, let's say, perennialism. And the strength of perennialism is that, well, you can recognize that, yeah, these religions have been bumping into each other, and there are patterns that are common in many religions and all of that. The weakness of perennialism is the samey doesn't allow for good definition and a place to live. You don't live in perennialism, and I think this is part of John Vervaeke's point about the Silk Road. You have to live in a place. Now, there might be commonalities between religions. There are also differences between religions and distinctives between the religions. And so what you're always dealing with is, okay, how can we come to terms both with the commonalities and the conflicts between them? And again, many people, in a way to cope with the meaning crisis and get out of their own personal meaning crisis, sort of like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, she says to Richard Dawkins, I choose to believe. And there's a concreteness and a crunchiness in going to a steep slope religious tradition and saying, I've lived without meaning. Now, boy, I'm going to have a meaning engine like you wouldn't believe, because I'm going to the steepest slope religion and I am going to do that religion hard. So fair enough. And the reactivity between religions, again, is a reality. People aren't reactive about what they don't care about. If it's something of ultimate concern for them, they react strongly. And so, as John will say later, I mean, the Silk Road is is no stranger to violent conflict. I mean, just read a little bit of Mongol history and the Mongol Empire. And this is where, I mean, for a lot of people, especially Protestants in the West, who grew up, or at least whose curriculums were formed before the fall of the Iron Curtain, the story of Christianity sort of goes like, well, of course, there was Jesus and his disciples, and then after Jesus and his disciples, stuff happened, we're a little vague, but then Constantine messed it all up, and then there's sort of a Christian dark age until Luther turns on the light, and then pick your reformer of choice, might be Anabaptist, Lutheran, Calvinist, or something, or a saint that comes later, and the lights came on again, and then in the colonial period, the church goes all around the world. Except that the church went all around Eurasia very early. I mean, again, there's tradition that Thomas got to India early, and the church goes all the way to China early. In fact, Christianity had been impacting these other religions, even when ostensibly people would go and say, well, I don't see any Christianity. Well, there's some of that Christian code that's floating out there. Well, why? Because even though America might be sort of the height of a religious marketplace here and now, religions do act in markets, and people will, for their own personal choices, for civilizational choices and cultural choices, people will make selections. And so Christianity has been impacting these other religions for a very long time. John Vervaeke's about to say this.
Of, a prescribed kind of modality of religion, it could be in the Christian or the Buddhist, or any religion. Whereas this is a very open.
Now, these prescribed modalities, oops, where's my face? There it is. These prescribed modalities, after I finished watching the Richard Dawkins, Ayaan Hirsi Ali conversation, I thought, yeah, as we're talking about a civilizational Christianity, even if it's, let's say, under a layer of, oh, no, it's secular, it's not Christian, because we have to afford a degree of pluralism. And don't forget that Christianity it's not the only religious tradition that brought a degree of religious liberty. You can find a degree of religious liberty in Islam. You can find a degree of religious liberty in Asia. Even polytheism afforded a particular kind of religious liberty. But again, they're not necessarily all the same. And the limits of Christian religious liberty we are currently exploring, and the Brits are especially exploring it as numbers in Islam rise, and there's anxiety about that, and they're trying to figure all of that out. But these religions are impacting each other. Now, again, this is part of the reason why I put my focus on relationship with the Son of God, Jesus Christ, in terms of Christianity, someone who trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves. But these things, these Christianities, are they hyper objects? What on earth are they? They're massive. They're self-contradictory often, at least in terms of their adherents are fighting with one another. They're these enormous things, but they are impacting each other. And you look at, so Raj hasn't been doing much in the corner lately, but my friend Raj, who was on the channel, who's Sikh, I mean, Sikhi is only 500 years old, and in that part of India, they've got some Indian religions, they've got some Islam, they've got some Christianity, and then they have their gurus, and they have their forms of religion, and it's fascinating talking to him about, comparing notes between how I see Christianity and how he sees Sikhi, because there are times when he hears me preach, or he hears me talk, or he listens to a video and he's like, oh, we have stuff that's just like that. And it's like, well, how did that get in there? Well, did you get it from observing nature? Did you get it from philosophical contemplation? Or was there some kind of code that came in through one way or another and sort of got carried along and built in? Or how exactly did that happen?
path, in the sense that one could be, a Buddhist or a Christian, or whatever, and then, but still visit these other places, and because there is no thing called called a Christian or a Buddhist, or like it's there's a uniqueness.
And again, as Yosef, the point that Yosef makes, he says, "Well, yeah, I understand what you mean when you say that, but I'm a Jew, and I'm a learned Jew, and I've studied our tradition, and I have my own take within the internal conflicts. So please don't call me a Christian." I mean, he understands what we're saying, and he's not offended. And at least in the corner, a big part of our practice in the corner is, well, let's not get too offended too quickly. Let's not get too upset and then have to unfollow Redeemed Zoomer because he was dumping on the PCA because he wants the PC USA to be redeemed. No, I lost. No, it's down here. Here we go.
To every particular journey, which has a whole tapestry of different influences.
Yeah, and not only individually but collectively. I mean, the advent of Christianity transformed Judaism. The advent of Islam transformed Christianity. These religions, they don't remain isolated from each other. There's always this toing and froing and mutual transformation, some of it hostile, some of it friendly. And I want to say to people, I'm under no delusions. The actual Silk Road, which was for commerce and also the trade of ideas, there was violence and bloodshed and warfare associated with it. I'm idealizing from that what it created. It created a lingua philosophica, right? It created this pathway where you had sort of Neoplatonism from the West and Zen from the East reaching towards each other, being influenced by Vedanta and other things along the way. Now, about the issue about homeless, I agree with Chris, and I think...
Now, what he's about to say seems a little off topic, but it's actually a great example of this very process, because, of course, John has had a long history with Christianity, and you can find one of the better tellings of his stories was with his first conversation with Elizabeth Oldfield. She's even better at pulling people's stories out than I am. It's just so, calm and smooth with that English accent, lulls you to sleep, and boo, before you know it, you're spilling your guts to the woman. But so John gives an example of his complex relationship with Christianity and some recent events and how they've impacted him.
The move is from the cynics who thought you had to, is a particular physical home that you had to abandon, to the Stoics, as Chris said, and the Socratic sense of being cosmopolitan, where the cosmos was your polis, that you're at home in the cosmos. And I think the part of that is the recovery of something which is now becoming increasingly more scientifically plausible and increasingly more realizable in practice, which is a recovery, and I mean that in like the Tolkien sense, of the microcosmic, macrocosmic relationship, mutual internalization and indwelling. And that recovery of that profound interpenetration, I think is, and finding that through line is exactly what we're talking about. It's that sense of home. And this has again landed for me very personally, very recently. I was very honored when Jordan Peterson called me and invited me to participate in his next big series, the Gospel Seminar. And as somebody who has a very fraught relationship with Christianity, I don't know if that's the right word, I was there, and I made it very clear. In fact, Jordan, at one point, we were doing individual interviews, and I was saying how I'm there as a non-theist, a Zen Neoplatonist non-theist, and a skeptic in the ancient sense of deep inquirer and open and wanting to hear. And the director said, "You just made that up right now? Like that just came out of you?" And Jordan said, "That's why he's here. Like they wanted me here for that." And they thanked me for it. And so I want to make very clear that I was well received and welcomed, and I participated in a way that I think, in a virtuous sense, I'm very proud of. But as I was doing this, and I did that long preamble because I don't want people to misinterpret what I'm saying, right? I came to the a great peace, and I'm reading a lot of books on Jesus, some of them from Christians, some of them from Zen Buddhists, which has been really wonderful. Sally McFagg's presentation on the parables and her proposal that Jesus is the parable of God. All of this was just resonating with all of this. But a great peace. All this when you try to talk this way, you sound like you're in an old time Disney movie or a Hallmark commercial. And it's frustrating. Um, a great peace came over me because I realized, and I really mean this in a very kind way, my longing to return to Christianity and the envy I had fell away from me. And I felt deeply, deeply at peace. And I can't, and it's that, and the problem I'm struggling with is that sounds very negative. That sounds like I finally was completely orphaned and homeless. And in one sort of technical sense, that's true. But I found that I had come into a more living relationship with Jesus of Nazareth. Um, and I am not criticizing the Christianity that was made present to me because I was very impressed by it. And I want everybody to hear that. And very respectful of it and appreciative of it. I learned a lot. Genuine dialogos was taking place repeatedly. Um, but I just realized that the Silk Road and what it is coming to mean for me is giving me that peace. And
And it goes on, and I got another clip that I'm saving for another video, which is a little different. But and I think John nicely captures it. And he nicely captures where so many nuns are. And what's so interesting about this whole conversation, and I've tried to engage with this particular video. Which tab is it? No, not him. No, not that one. Um, no, not that one. Where is it? Oh, this one. This whole video is Christopher Mastro Pietro, in my conversation with him a few years ago, sees the sun receding. And in some ways, he sees the advent of this coming towards him now. And it's not a religion that you construct and do. It's not instrumentalized like that. It's something you receive. And it reminds me of Justin Brierley's project and Arnold and the tide coming back in again, which Justin begins his book with. So, but it's, and I know, finish the sentence, Vander Clay. There's someone in my consciousness Congress. Got to do some I got to do some internal family systems to have me stop interrupting each other. I'm from New Jersey. We interrupt each other all the time. It's a very noisy head. Well, not really noisy. It's a very happy head, but it's like a big, happy, loud family in here. That's what it's like. How does Jesus become Lord of all? Philippians 2, every knee will bow. I don't know. Now, see, I've just sort of given aid and comfort to the perennials and the post-Christians and all of that. But Jesus is a sneaky colonizer. That's what I believe. I mean, I'm a Christian minister. What do you expect me to say? What do you expect me to think? That's who I am. It's like when I left my homeless friend in the other room and he stole the Sunday school money, and I confronted him about it. He said, "What do you expect? I'm an addict. Of course I stole the money." So, okay. Maybe end with the tweets. I think, again, I don't agree with Tom Holland on everything, of course, but yeah, I think I wouldn't be paying such close attention to him and cheering him on the way I do if I didn't think he was really making an enormous contribution to this, and even ways that sometimes makes Christians feel a little uncomfortable. Now, bear in mind, these Brits, keep their cards close to the chest, and when they're out in public doing a podcast, they're not going to present as Christians, because I've done videos about that before, that you sort of lose status when you're the kind of Christian in England who actually goes to church. Here in America, well, it's a little different, but depending on where you live, America's a very big place. So, yeah. Yeah. So now I feel settled. See, it only took 2 videos and how many hours, but now I feel settled. So have at it in the comments section. It's videos perhaps less messy, and so there'll be less comments, and YouTube won't like it, and maybe I won't have as clever a title as I had for this morning's video, but leave a comment. Let me know what you think.